One word. That was all it took to incinerate a legacy 3 decades in the making. Victor Kinsley, the untouchable titan of Silicon Valley, thought he was sitting on a throne of gold when he walked into the Gilded Oak. He believed the world existed solely to serve him, and that the young woman pouring his wine was nothing more than furniture, a stupid distraction beneath his notice. He didn't know that the trembling waitress held the keys to the $3 billion merger he was desperate to close. He didn't know that his arrogance was being broadcast to the one man who could destroy him. In the next few minutes, you are going to witness the most expensive tantrum in corporate history. This is the story of how a billionaire's ego cost him everything, and how a waitress served him a dish of justice he would never forget. Rain lashed against the tinted windows of the Maybach Excelero as it cut through the slick streets of Manhattan. Inside the leather-clad cabin, the air was still and cold, maintained at a precise 68 degrees, just as Victor Kinsley liked it. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit, his eyes scanning the digital portfolio on his tablet for the 100th time. The screen illuminated a face that was sharp, predatory, and exceptionally handsome in a way that made people uncomfortable. "We are 3 minutes away, Mr. Kinsley," the driver announced, his voice trembling slightly. Victor didn't look up. "You were supposed to be here 5 minutes ago, Jenkins. If I lose even a second of preparation time with Montgomery because of your incompetence, you'll be driving for Uber by midnight." Traffic was, "I don't pay you for excuses. I pay you for results." Silence. Victor swiped the screen, dismissing the driver's existence with a flick of his finger. Today was the day. The merger with Montgomery Holdings. It wasn't just a deal, it was a coronation. For years, Kinsley Tech had been the bleeding edge of artificial intelligence, but they were bleeding cash just as fast. They needed capital, and they needed the legitimacy that only Arthur Montgomery, the old money patriarch of New York finance, could provide. $3 billion. It was a number that would cement Victor's status, not just as a CEO, but as a god among men. The car glided to a halt in front of the Gilded Oak, the city's most exclusive dining establishment. It was the kind of place where the menu had no prices, and the wait list was measured in years. But Victor didn't wait. He never waited. The doorman, a burly man named Thomas, who had worked the door for 20 years, scrambled to open the car door, holding a large black umbrella to shield Victor from the downpour. Victor stepped out, his Italian leather shoes hitting the pavement with a decisive clack. He didn't acknowledge Thomas. He didn't nod. He simply walked under the umbrella and into the warmth of the restaurant, shedding the damp New York air like a snake shedding its skin. Inside the maître d', a polished Frenchman named Henri, stiffened. He knew Victor Kinsley. Everyone in the service industry in Manhattan knew Victor Kinsley, and they all feared him. He was a notorious tipper, not in that he tipped well, but that he used tips as a weapon, dangling $100 bills in front of staff, only to snatch them away for a smudge on a glass or a stutter in a sentence. "Mr. Kinsley," Henry said, bowing slightly, "your table is ready. The private alcove has requested." "Is Montgomery here yet?" Victor asked, stripping off his gloves and dropping them onto the podium without looking to see if Henri caught them. "Not yet, sir. You are 10 minutes early." "Good. That gives me time to inspect the setup. If the lighting is off like last time, Henry, I will have this place shut down for health code violations before the appetizer arrives. Do you understand?" "Perfectly, sir," Henry said, his jaw tight. "Right this way." Victor followed him, his eyes darting around the room, analyzing, judging. He saw a senator in the corner eating with a mistress. He saw a hedge fund manager, looking pale over a plate of oysters. Victor smirked. They were all small fish. After tonight, He would own this city. They arrived at Table 1, the prime spot secluded by velvet ropes and high-backed booths, offering privacy while still allowing the occupant to look down on the rest of the dining room. It was a power position. "Send over the sommelier," Victor commanded, sitting down and checking his reflection in the polished silverware. "And tell the kitchen that if the steak is even a degree over medium rare, I'm not paying for it. I want the 82 Petrus decanted immediately." Henri nodded and vanished, likely to hyperventilate in the walk-in freezer. Victor sat back, drumming his fingers on the white tablecloth. He pulled out his phone, sending a quick text to his CFO. "It's done. Prepare the press release." He was confident. Too confident. He didn't notice the young waitress standing near the service station, adjusting her apron, her hands shaking slightly. He didn't notice that the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted, a low-pressure system moving in. He was the center of his own universe, unaware that the orbit was about to collapse. Sadie Bennett wiped her palms on her apron for the third time in as many minutes. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of truffle oil and expensive cognac that permeated the air of the Gilded Oak. At 23, she was the youngest server on the floor, a fact that some of the older staff resented, but her work ethic was undeniable. She needed this job. The tuition for her final year of law school at Columbia was due in 2 weeks, and her scholarship only covered half. The rest had to come from double shifts and the generosity of strangers. "Sadie," Henry's voice was a harsh whisper as he materialized beside her. "Table 1, Kinsley." Sadie felt the blood drain from her face. "Henri, please." "Not him. You know what he did to Jessica last month." She quit on the spot. "Jessica was careless," Henri said, though his eyes held a flicker of sympathy. "Pierre is out with the flu, and you are the only one who knows the wine list well enough to handle the Petrus. Just be invisible. Pour, serve, and disappear. Do not speak unless spoken to. And for the love of God, do not make eye contact." "He's just a customer," Sadie said, trying to convince herself. "No," Henry corrected grimly. "He is a shark in a suit. He smells fear. Go." Sadie squared her shoulders. She was Sadie Bennett. She had maintained a 4.0 GPA while working 40 hours a week. She had raised her younger brother when their parents passed away. She was not going to let a tech bro with a superiority complex rattle her. She picked up the crystal decanter of Chateau Petrus, the red liquid swirling like dark blood, and walked toward the alcove. As she approached, she saw him. Victor Kinsley was on a call, his voice booming despite the hushed atmosphere of the restaurant. "I don't care if the Regulatory Commission has questions, Brad. We bury them in paperwork until they choke. This deal happens today, or you're fired." He hung up and slammed the phone onto the table just as Sadie arrived. "Good evening, Mr. Kinsley," Sadie said, her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I have the Petrus you requested." Victor didn't look at her. He waved a hand dismissively, gesturing toward the glass. "Pour, and try not to spill it. That bottle costs more than your education." The insult was casual, tossed out like a used napkin. Sadie felt a sting of heat in her cheeks, but she bit her tongue. "He doesn't know me," she thought. "He doesn't know what I'm worth." She stepped forward, executing the pour perfectly. The wine flowed smoothly, settling into the wide bowl of the glass without a single drop misplaced. She rotated the bottle, catching the drip with a linen cloth, and placed the decanter on the table with surgical precision. "Will you be waiting for your guest to order appetizers, sir?" she asked politely. Victor finally looked up. His eyes were cold, assessing her not as a human being, but as a piece of machinery that had just made a noise. He looked at her uniform, her pulled-back hair, her name tag. I will wait, Victor said, his lip curling slightly. And let's be clear, Sadie. Is it? If my guest's water glass drops below the half-full mark, I will consider it a personal failure on your part. Do we have an understanding? Yes, sir, Sadie said softly. Good. Now get out of my sight until Montgomery gets here. Sadie retreated to the service station, her hands trembling again. It wasn't the demands, it was the dehumanization. It was the way he looked through her. You okay? Whispered Mark, the bartender, as he polished a glass. He's a nightmare, Sadie murmured. Who is this Montgomery guy he's meeting? He seems terrified of him. Arthur Montgomery. Mark whistled low. Old school money. Real power. He owns half the real estate in Manhattan and has a reputation for being ruthless with people who lack integrity. If Kinsley is meeting him, it's a big deal. Integrity, Sadie scoffed quietly. Kinsley wouldn't know integrity if it hit him in the face. At that moment, the heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant swung open. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. If Victor Kinsley brought a storm with him, the man who just entered brought the mountain. Arthur Montgomery was in his late 60s, with silver hair and a posture that suggested he had carried the weight of the world and found it light. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that was understated but clearly expensive. He walked with a cane, but he didn't lean on it. He used it as an accessory. Beside him walked a younger man, perhaps 30, with a kind face and sharp, observant eyes. His grandson and protege, Leo Montgomery. Henry rushed forward, bowing lower than he had for Victor. Mr. Montgomery, welcome back to the Gilded Oak. It is an honor. Good to see you, Henry, Arthur said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that carried warmth. Is Mr. Kinsley here? Yes, sir. Table 1. Arthur nodded, his expression unreadable. He turned to Leo. Keep your eyes open, Leo. Character is revealed in the small moments, not the boardrooms. I'm watching, grandfather, Leo said softly. As they walked toward the alcove, Sadie felt a strange sense of familiarity when she looked at Arthur. She couldn't place it, but something about his eyes, piercing yet kind, reminded her of someone. She shook it off. She had a job to do. She grabbed a pitcher of ice water and a basket of fresh bread. This was it. The meeting was starting. She had to be perfect. Victor stood up as Arthur approached, a wide, plastic smile plastered on his face. Arthur, so glad you could make it. And you brought an associate? My grandson, Leo, Arthur said, not shaking Victor's extended hand, but instead gesturing to the booth. He's learning the family business. I trust you don't mind if he observes. Not at all, not at all, Victor said, retracting his hand and smoothing his jacket, though a flicker of annoyance crossed his eyes. The more the merrier. Please, sit. I've taken the liberty of ordering the 82 Petrus. An aggressive choice, Arthur noted, settling into the booth. Shall we get down to business, or shall we eat first? Business, always business, Victor said, sitting down. I have the papers ready. The valuation of Kinsley Tech is at an all-time high. With your capital injection, we can crush the competition within the quarter. Sadie approached the table to pour water for the newcomers. She moved silently, filling Arthur's glass, then Leo's. Thank you, Leo said, looking up at her and smiling. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes. Sadie was taken aback. Customers at table 1 rarely said thank you. You're welcome, sir. She moved to refill Victor's water, even though it was only down by a sip. As she leaned in, Victor, animated by his pitch, threw his hand out to emphasize a point about market dominance. We are going to obliterate them, Arthur. We will. His hand struck Sadie's arm. The pitcher wobbled. A small splash of ice water, no more than a tablespoon, sloshed out of the pitcher and landed on the sleeve of Victor's pristine Brioni suit. Time seemed to stop. The restaurant went silent. Victor froze. He looked at the dark spot on his grey suit. Then he looked at Sadie. The mask of the charming businessman vanished, replaced by a contorted visage of pure, unadulterated rage. "You!" Victor hissed, his voice rising. Sadie's eyes went wide. "Sir, I am so sorry. You hit my arm and—" "I hit your arm?" Victor roared, standing up and causing his chair to scrape violently against the floor. "You clumsy, incompetent little idiot. Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" "Sir, please, I can get a towel," Sadie stamina. "Get away from me," Victor shouted, swiping his hand and knocking the bread basket off the table. It clattered to the floor, rolls rolling everywhere. "You are stupid. That is what you are. Stupid and useless. You ruin everything you touch. How do you even have a job here? Can you even read the menu, or do you just look at the pictures?" The entire restaurant was watching now. The senator, the hedge fund manager, the staff. Sadie felt tears pricking her eyes, the humiliation burning like acid in her chest. But she stood her ground, clutching the pitcher. "Mr. Kinsley," Sadie said, her voice shaking but audible. "It was an accident. There is no need for name-calling." "I will call you whatever I want," Victor sneered, leaning into her face. "I am Victor Kinsley. I could buy this restaurant and turn it into a parking lot just to fire you. Now get out of my sight before I have you arrested for assault." Arthur Montgomery had not moved. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the head of his cane. He watched the scene unfold with eyes that had turned from warm to glacial. "Victor," Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a razor. Victor spun around, composing himself instantly, though his face was still red. "Arthur, I apologize. The help here is abysmal. It's hard to find good labor these days. They're all so entitled." "Entitled," Arthur repeated, tasting the word. "Yes. But let's not let this stupid girl ruin our evening," Victor said, sitting back down and dabbing his sleeve with a napkin. "Where were we? Ah, yes, the valuation." Sadie turned to leave, her head bowed, fighting back the tears. She wanted to run, to quit, to never come back. "Wait," Arthur said. Sadie stopped. Victor looked confused. Arthur turned his gaze to Sadie. "Miss? What is your name?" "Sadie, sir. Sadie Bennett." Arthur's eyes widened slightly. A flash of recognition, stronger this time. "Bennett. Tell me, Sadie, why are you working here?" I'm paying for law school, sir," she whispered. "Law school? Which one?" "Columbia. Final year." Victor laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "Law school? Her? Arthur, she's lying to get a bigger tip. Look at her. She's a waitress. She's not future lawyer material." Arthur ignored Victor completely. He looked at Sadie, studying her face, then looked at Leo. Leo gave a nearly imperceptible nod, pulling out his phone under the table. "Sadie," Arthur said gently, "would you please stay? I have a feeling we are going to need a witness for what happens next." Victor frowned. "Witness? Arthur, what are you talking about? We just need to sign the papers." "There will be no papers signed today, Victor," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. "What?" Victor blinked. "I don't understand. Because of a little water? I can buy 1,000 suits." "It's not about the suit," Arthur said, standing up slowly. "It's about the stupid girl." The silence that descended upon the private alcove of the Gilded Oak was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes an explosion. Victor Kinsley stood frozen, his napkin halfway to his lapel, his brain struggling to process the refusal he had just heard. "Excuse me?" Victor let out a breathless, incredulous laugh. "Arthur, for a second there, I thought you said there would be no papers signed. That's a very dry sense of humor you have." Arthur Montgomery did not smile. He did not blink. He slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket and sat back down, his movements deliberate and terrifyingly calm. "I am not known for my humor, Victor, and I certainly do not joke about $3 billion investments." Victor's smile faltered, twitching at the corners. He looked from Arthur to Leo, and then, with a sneer of pure disdain, at Sadie, who was still standing there, clutching the silver pitcher like a shield. "Arthur, look," Victor said, his voice taking on a patronizing, reasonable tone. "I understand. You're a man of principle. You don't like rudeness. Fine. I admit I was a bit harsh. It's been a long day. The market is volatile. My blood sugar is low." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black money clip. He peeled off $500 bills and tossed them onto the table in front of Sadie. "There," Victor said, gesturing to the cash. $500. That's probably more than you make in a week. Consider it an apology for the noise. Now take it. Go buy yourself some new shoes and send over a waiter who knows how to hold a pitcher. We have business to discuss." Sadie looked at the money. It was crisp, clean, and insulting. $500. It would cover her textbooks for the next semester. It would buy groceries for a month. But as she looked at Victor's smug face, she saw something that made her stomach turn. He wasn't paying her an apology. He was paying her to cease existing in his world. He was buying her dignity. "No," Sadie said. The word hung in the air. Victor's head snapped toward her. "What did you say?" "I said no," Sadie repeated, her voice gaining strength. She reached out, picked up the bills, and deliberately placed them back on the table in front of Victor. "I don't want your money, Mr. Kinsley. And my shoes are fine." Victor's face turned a shade of purple that clashed violently with the red walls of the restaurant. "You insolent little—" "Victor!" Arthur's voice cracked like a whip. "Sit down." Victor remained standing, his chest heaving. "Arthur, this is absurd. You are letting a waitress, a nobody, dictate the terms of a merger that will change the face of the tech industry. She is nothing. She is a replaceable cog in a machine." "That is exactly the problem," Arthur said quietly. "You see people as cogs. You see them as numbers on a spreadsheet. And that, Victor, is why Kinsley Tech is failing." "Failing," Victor scoffed, finally sitting down but leaning forward aggressively. "We are not failing. We are pivoting. We have the most advanced AI algorithms in the hemisphere. We are weeks away from launching the Helios Protocol." "The Helios Protocol," Leo spoke up for the first time. His voice was soft, distinct, and carried a weight of knowledge that surprised Victor. "The predictive algorithm that supposedly maps consumer behavior with 99% accuracy." "Exactly!" Victor beamed, thinking he had found an ally. "Leo, you get it. It's revolutionary. It's worth billions. And this distraction," he waved a hand at Sadie, "is irrelevant to the code." "The code is only as good as the man who owns it," Arthur said. "I have a rule, Victor. I have followed it for 40 years. It has saved me from bad deals and worse partners. It is called the waiter rule." Victor blinked. "The waiter rule?" "A person who is nice to you but rude to the waiter is not a nice person," Arthur quoted. "But it goes deeper than that. It is a test of character. A CEO who abuses those he perceives as beneath him will eventually abuse his shareholders, his partners, and his employees. If you treat a young woman like garbage because of a drop of water, what will you do to my family's legacy when the stock dips? What will you do to your customers when they complain? This is ridiculous, Victor spat. I am a visionary. I don't have time to coddle incompetent staff. She is not incompetent, Arthur said. She handled the Petrus perfectly. She was polite despite your hostility, and she has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire board of directors. Victor stood up again, buttoning his jacket. Fine. If you want to play moral crusader, go ahead. Walk away. But you are walking away from the biggest ROI of your life. There are other investors, Arthur. The Japanese banks are begging to get in on this. I don't need you. It was a bluff. A massive, desperate bluff. Sadie could see the sweat beading on Victor's forehead. He needed this deal. Without it, he was finished. Sit down, Victor, Arthur commanded again. But this time, he didn't look at the CEO. He looked at Sadie. Sadie, please, take the empty chair next to Leo. Sadie hesitated. Sir, I can't. I'm on shift. Henry will fire me. Henry will do no such thing, Arthur said calmly. I own the building this restaurant is in. I am essentially Henry's landlord. If he has a problem, he can take it up with me. Please. Sit. Sadie looked at the terrified Henri, who was peeking out from behind a pillar. Henry gave a frantic nod, signaling her to do whatever the billionaire wanted. Slowly, Sadie unfastened her apron. She folded it neatly and placed it on the service tray. She smoothed her black skirt and sat down in the plush leather booth directly across from Victor Kinsley. Victor looked as if he was hallucinating. You're letting the help sit at the table? This is a private business meeting. It is an investigation, Arthur corrected, and Sadie is now a consultant. A consultant? Victor laughed hysterically. She's a waitress. She serves bread. And she studies law at Columbia, Leo added, opening a leather folder on the table, which means she understands the concept of fraud better than you might think. The word fraud sucked the oxygen out of the booth. Victor went still. Be very careful what you say next, Leo. That sounds like libel. It's only libel if it's untrue, Arthur said. He turned to Sadie, his eyes softening. Sadie, earlier you mentioned your last name. Bennett. And you said you are in your final year of law school. Tell me, was your father Robert Bennett? The sounds of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the jazz music, seemed to fade into a dull roar in Sadie's ears. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. How? Sadie's voice trembled. How did you know my father's name? Victor Kinsley shifted in his seat. The arrogance was still there, but beneath it, a flicker of genuine unease began to take root. He took a sip of water, his eyes darting between Arthur and Sadie. Robert Bennett was a brilliant man, Arthur said, his voice filled with a melancholy respect. He was a structural engineer and a software architect. About 10 years ago, he came to me with a proposal, a new way to compress data for high-speed transfer. He called it the Bennett compression. He wanted funding to start his own firm. Sadie felt a lump form in her throat. She remembered that time. She was 13. Her father would stay up late in their small apartment in Queens, surrounded by diagrams and code, his eyes bright with hope. He never got the funding, she whispered. No, Arthur sighed. I made a mistake. I was too conservative back then. I told him to come back when he had a prototype. A month later, he called me to say he had found a partner, a young, ambitious entrepreneur who promised him the world. Funding, resources, a lab. All Robert had to do was sign over the IP rights to the company for safekeeping and equity. Arthur turned his gaze slowly to Victor. Victor was staring at the tablecloth, his jaw clenched so tight, a muscle feathered in his cheek. Lots of people worked for me in the early days, Arthur. I can't remember every code monkey. Don't you dare call him that, Sadie snapped. The anger flared up, hot and sudden, overriding her fear. My father wasn't a monkey. He was a genius, and he trusted you. Victor looked at her, his eyes narrowing. Wait, you're Bob Bennett's kid. He let out a short, cruel huff of air. Small world. Look, your dad was a good coder, sure, but he didn't have the stomach for business. He cracked under pressure. He didn't crack, Sadie said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. He died. He had a heart attack 6 months after you fired him. You took his code, you locked him out of the building, and you told him his equity shares were worthless because of some loophole in the contract. He lost everything. The stress killed him. It was a standard non-performance clause, Victor shouted, slamming his hand on the table. He wasn't meeting targets. It was business. It wasn't personal. It became personal when you erased his name from the patent, Leo interjected, sliding a piece of paper across the table. It was a photocopy of an old patent filing from 2015. We did a deep dive into Kinsley Tech's assets during our due diligence, Victor, Leo explained calmly. We found the original source code for your core product. The comments in the metadata? They were signed R. Bennett, but the patent lists Victor Kinsley as the sole inventor. Victor snatched the paper. This proves nothing. Code is iterative. I improved it. I optimized it. I own it. You stole it? Sadie said, the realization washing over her like cold water. All these years, I knew he felt cheated, but I didn't know it was you. I didn't know the great Victor Kinsley was just a thief in a tailored suit. I am not a thief, Victor roared. He stood up, knocking his chair over this time. I built this empire. Me! I took a raw idea and made it marketable. Your father was a dreamer, and dreamers get eaten in this world. I did him a favor by letting him work for me at all. He pointed a shaking finger at Sadie. And you're just like him. Weak. Emotional. Serving food to your betters. You think this little sob story changes anything? I have lawyers who cost more per hour than you will earn in your lifetime. You can't touch me. Arthur tapped his cane on the floor, a singular, hollow thud. Victor, Arthur said, you seem to be under the impression that this meeting is still a negotiation. It is not. Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a cell phone. He placed it on the table. The screen was lit up. It was on a call. Who are you talking to? Victor demanded, eyeing the phone. I'm not talking to anyone, Arthur said, but the microphone has been on for the last 10 minutes, and on the other end of this line is the Attorney General of New York, a personal friend of mine. Victor's face went white, ashen. You recorded this? New York is a one-party consent state, Sadie said instantly, her legal training kicking in automatically. As long as one person in the conversation consents to the recording, it's legal. Mr. Montgomery consented. Victor looked at Sadie with a mixture of hatred and fear. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a lawyer, and she had him. This is entrapment, Victor screamed. It's a character interview, Arthur corrected. And you failed. You just admitted to altering the patent and manipulating the equity clause to defraud an employee. That is a federal crime, Victor. But that's not the only reason the deal is off. Arthur leaned forward. You called my waitress stupid. You treated her like dirt. You thought she was powerless. But in my world, Victor, the people you step on are the ones who eventually trip you up. I will not give $3 billion to a man who lacks basic humanity. Victor looked around the room. The patrons were staring. The staff was watching. He was exposed. But Victor Kinsley was a narcissist, and narcissists do not go down quietly. He straightened his jacket, his eyes gleaming with a manic light. "You think you can destroy me?" Victor sneered. "I am Kinsley Tech. The shareholders love me. The board fears me. You have a recording of a private conversation? Good luck getting it admissible in court. I'll bury you in litigation for 20 years. And as for you," he turned his venom toward Sadie, "I will make sure you never pass the bar. I will make sure you never work in this city again." Sadie stood up. She didn't feel small anymore. She felt the weight of her father's memory on her shoulders, giving her strength. "You can try," Sadie said steadily. "But you're forgetting something, Mr. Kinsley." "What?" he spat. "You're not the only one who knows how to read the fine print." Victor scoffed, turning away from the table as if to leave. "I'm done with this charade. I'm leaving. And Arthur, you'll be hearing from my legal team regarding breach of good faith negotiations. Mr. Kinsley," Sadie's voice rang out, clear and authoritative. It wasn't the voice of a server, it was the voice of a prosecutor. "Before you go, you might want to check the status of your Helios Protocol trademark." Victor stopped. He froze in the middle of the dining room. He turned back slowly. "What are you talking about?" Sadie walked around the table. She picked up the folder Leo had brought. She had glanced at the papers while Arthur and Victor were arguing. She had seen something, a date, a name, that triggered a memory from her intense study sessions in intellectual property law. "The Helios Protocol," Sadie said, holding up a document. "You filed for the trademark 6 months ago, but you filed it under Kinsley Technologies, LLC, a Delaware shell company." "So what? That's standard corporate structuring," Victor dismissed. "It is," Sadie agreed. "Except for one small detail. You allowed the holding status of the original Bennett compression patent to lapse 3 weeks ago. You probably missed the renewal notice because you fired your compliance officer to cut costs. I read about it in the Financial Times." Victor's eyes widened. "That's administrative. It means nothing." "It means everything," Sadie said, a small, fierce smile playing on her lips. "Because when a patent holding lapses into the public domain, or when the ownership chain is broken, any derivative works, like your Helios Protocol, become vulnerable to interference if they rely on that core code." She turned to Leo. "You said you did due diligence. Did you buy the lapsed rights?" Leo grinned, a shark-like expression that mirrored his grandfather's. "We sure did. This morning. For a surprisingly low fee." "What?" Victor whispered. The color drained from his face completely. "It means," Sadie said, locking eyes with the billionaire, "that Mr. Montgomery doesn't need to merge with you to get the technology. He already owns the foundation of it. He owns the house. You just own the furniture inside it. And without his permission, you can't launch the Helios Protocol. You can't sell it. You can't even turn it on." "That's a lie," Victor screamed. "That's illegal." "It's business," Arthur Montgomery said, echoing Victor's words from earlier. "It's not personal, Victor. It's just better strategy." Victor looked like a trapped animal. His $3 billion deal was gone. His core product was held hostage by the man he had just insulted. And it was all because he had been too cheap to pay a compliance officer and too arrogant to notice the stupid Waitress new IP law. "You tricked me," Victor hissed. "You set this up." "We came here to sign a deal," Arthur said sternly. "If you had been a decent man, if you had treated Sadie with respect, we would have overlooked the patent issue. We would have fixed it together, as partners. We would have given you a fair price. But you showed us who you really are. You showed us you are a liability." Victor's hands curled into fists. He was losing everything. His reputation, his company, his future. The rage that had been simmering boiled over. He forgot where he was. He forgot the witnesses. He only saw the girl who had humiliated him. "You little witch!" Victor lunged across the gap between them, his hand raised to strike Sadie. The restaurant gasped, but the blow never landed. Before Victor's hand could connect, a strong hand caught his wrist in midair. It wasn't Leo. It wasn't Arthur. It was Thomas, the doorman. He had entered quietly when the shouting started. He was 6'4", a former linebacker, and he held Victor's arm with a grip like steel. "I think it's time for you to leave, Mr. Kinsley," Thomas said, his voice deep and menacing. "Get your hands off me." Victor struggled, but he was powerless against the larger man. "Thomas," Arthur said calmly, "please escort Mr. Kinsley out, and ensure he does not return." "With pleasure, Mr. Montgomery," Thomas said. He twisted Victor's arm behind his back, forcing the billionaire to bend over in pain. "This isn't over," Victor screamed as he was frog-marched toward the exit. "I'll sue you all. I'll destroy this place. Do you hear me? I am Victor Kinsley." "You were Victor Kinsley," Sadie said quietly to herself, as the doors slammed shut, silencing his tantrums. "Now, you're just a defendant." The restaurant was silent for a moment, and then, spontaneously, applause broke out. The senator clapped. The hedge fund manager clapped. The staff cheered. Sadie stood there, her heart pounding. She looked at Arthur and Leo. Arthur smiled, a genuine grandfatherly smile. "Well done, Sadie. That was impressive." I remembered the case law," Sadie stammered, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving her legs weak. "The case of Miller versus Anderson regarding lapsed patent renewals. It was on my midterms." "You have a sharp mind," Leo said, looking at her with admiration. "And you were right. We bought the rights this morning. We were going to gift them back to Kinsley as a signing bonus. Now, I think we'll keep them." "Sadie," Arthur said, leaning back in the booth, "I think your days of serving wine are over. How would you like a job?" Sadie blinked. "A job? But I haven't finished my degree." "I don't need a lawyer," Arthur said. "I have plenty of those. I need someone who understands the human element. I need a director of corporate ethics for Montgomery Holdings. Someone to make sure we never do business with a Victor Kinsley again." Sadie felt tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of relief. "Mr. Montgomery, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Leo urged. "The pay is significantly better than tips, and will cover the rest of your tuition." It was a dream come true. It was the moment her life changed. But just as Sadie was about to open her mouth to accept, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant banged open again. Everyone turned, expecting Victor to have returned for another round of screaming. But it wasn't Victor. It was a team of 4 police officers, led by a detective in a cheap suit. "We received a call about a disturbance," the detective announced, scanning the room. "And we have a warrant for the seizure of electronic devices belonging to a Mr. Victor Kinsley." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Kinsley has just left, Detective. But may I ask what this is about?" The detective looked at Arthur, then at Sadie. "We received a tip-off about massive embezzlement and wire fraud at Kinsley Tech. The tip came in 20 minutes ago from an anonymous source inside the restaurant." Arthur and Leo looked at each other. They hadn't called the police. Slowly, all eyes turned to Henri, the maître d'. Henri stood by the podium, his face pale but determined. He held up his cell phone. "He called my staff stupid," Henri said, his French accent thick with emotion. "And he insulted my restaurant. I listened to him bragging about hiding money in the Cayman Islands while I was seating the senator earlier. I took notes." Sadie smiled. "The waiter rule. It wasn't just Arthur. The entire staff had been listening. The invisible army had risen up. "Well," Arthur said, picking up his menu, "it seems Mr. Kinsley is going to have a very long night. Now, Sadie, about that steak. I believe I ordered it medium rare." The arrest of Victor Kinsley was not a quiet affair. It was a spectacle that eclipsed the flashing lights of Times Square. As Thomas the doorman held the billionaire in a secure lock until the officers arrived, the paparazzi, tipped off by the chaos spilling out of the Gilded Oak, descended like vultures. When Victor was led out in handcuffs, his Brioni jacket pulled over his head in a futile attempt to hide his face, the image was broadcast live to millions. The headline on the scrolling tickers was brutal and immediate. "Tech Titan topples. Kinsley arrested for fraud and assault." But Victor Kinsley was a man with resources, and a cornered beast fights the hardest. By the next morning, he was out on a $10 million bail, surrounded by a phalanx of aggressive defense attorneys led by a man named Gregory Hammer, a lawyer known in New York as the Shredder. Sadie Bennett woke up not to the quiet hum of her small apartment, but to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Her face was on the cover of the Post. They called her the waitress who took down a wolf. "Don't read the comments," Leo Montgomery said. He was sitting in the small living room of her Queens apartment, looking out of place in his designer casual wear among her mismatched furniture. Arthur had sent him to ensure her safety. "Kinsley's PR team is working overtime. They're trying to paint you as a disgruntled, opportunistic gold digger who staged the incident." Sadie looked at the TV. Victor was holding a press conference on the steps of the courthouse. He looked rested, confident, and completely remorseless. "This is a witch hunt," Victor declared to the cameras, his voice smooth. "Orchestrated by my competitors who are terrified of the Helios Protocol. And their pawn is a low-level service worker with a grudge and a fantasy. We will be countersuing Miss Bennett for defamation of character, slander, and tortious interference with business relations. We will take everything she has." Sadie felt a cold pit in her stomach. "He's suing me? I don't have anything to take." "It's an intimidation tactic," Leo said, his jaw tightening. "He wants you to recant. He wants you to say you made it up, that he never hit you, that the patent talk was nonsense. If you fold, the criminal case weakens." "I won't fold," Sadie said, though her voice shook. "My father didn't fold. He just broke. I won't let that happen to me." "Good," a voice came from the doorway. It was Arthur Montgomery. He walked in, leaning on his cane, looking around the small apartment with a gentle curiosity. "Because we are going to war, Sadie, and we have ammunition he doesn't know about." Arthur placed a heavy box on her kitchen table. "This morning, the FBI raided Kinsley's offices based on Henri's tip, but they missed something my forensic accountants found in the cloud backups we acquired when we bought the patent rights." Sadie opened the box. It was filled with hard drives and old notebooks. "These are the original development logs for the Bennett compression," Arthur explained. "Kinsley tried to scrub them. He tried to overwrite the authorship metadata. But he made a mistake." "What mistake?" Sadie asked, picking up one of the notebooks. It was her father's handwriting. Tears pricked her eyes. "He didn't know your father wrote poetry," Arthur said softly. Sadie looked up, confused. "Poetry? Dad loved Yeats, but he wasn't a poet." "He was in code," Leo interjected, pulling up a laptop. "Look at this. This is the source code for the Helios Protocol core. It looks like standard C++, right? But look at the spacing in the command lines. Look at the variable names in the subroutines." Sadie leaned in. She read the variable names in sequence. Turning or Jaya Falcon, cannot hear falconer, lost. The second coming, Sadie whispered. Yates, turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Your father embedded the entire poem into the architecture of the code, Arthur said, a smile touching his lips. It's a digital watermark, a fingerprint. And here is the kicker. Kinsley's updated version. The one he claims he built from scratch. It still contains the poem. He didn't even know it was there. He copied your father's work so lazily, he copied the soul of it too. This proves it, Sadie said, her heart pounding. It proves he stole it. It proves perjury on his patent applications. It proves everything, Arthur agreed, but we need to present it in court, and Kinsley has requested a summary judgment to dismiss the case next week. He's trying to kill this before it gets to a jury. We need you to take the stand, Sadie, not as a witness to the assault, but as the expert on the code. Me, Sadie stepped back. I'm a law student. I'm not a computer scientist. You are Robert Bennett's daughter, Arthur said firmly. You grew up watching him write this. You know the poem. You know the man. And you are the only one who can look Victor Kinsley in the eye and tell him he is a fraud. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with tension. Victor sat at the defense table looking bored, checking his watch. When Sadie walked in, flanked by Arthur and Leo, Victor didn't even look at her. He was that confident. Gregory Hammer, Victor's lawyer, began his opening statement by tearing Sadie apart. He called her incompetent, emotional, and a liar. He painted Victor as a job creator, a visionary, a victim of cancel culture. Your Honor, Hammer bellowed, this case is built on a spilled glass of water and the hallucinations of a waitress who thinks she understands complex intellectual property. It is a farce. Call your first witness, Judge Holloway said, looking unimpressed by the theatrics. The prosecution called Sadie Bennett. As she walked to the stand, she felt the eyes of the world on her. She swore to tell the truth. She sat down. Miss Bennett, the prosecutor began, can you tell the court the nature of your relationship with the defendant? He was a customer at the restaurant where I worked, Sadie said clearly, and he was my father's employer. Objection, Hammer stood up. Relevance? Goes to motive and character, Your Honor, the prosecutor said. Overruled, the judge said. The questioning continued. Sadie recounted the night at the restaurant, the insults, the arrogance, the stupid comment. Then, the prosecutor shifted gears. Miss Bennett, are you familiar with the code known as the Bennett compression? I am. How? My father taught me how to read it, Sadie said. He used to say that code was just logic with a rhythm. He taught me to spot the rhythm. And did you examine the code for the so-called Helios protocol? I did. What did you find? Sadie looked directly at Victor. For the first time, he looked back. His eyes were cold, dead sharks. I found a ghost, Sadie said. I found my father. She explained the Yates poem. She explained the variables. As she spoke, screens around the courtroom displayed the code, highlighting the hidden words. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Victor's face began to change. The boredom vanished. A sheen of sweat appeared on his upper lip. He whispered frantically to Hammer. Hammer looked at the screens, then at Victor, his face draining of color. He didn't know, Sadie said, pointing at Victor. He calls himself a genius. He calls me stupid. But a genius would have checked the foundation of the house he stole. A genius would have known that you can't build a lie on top of the truth and expect it to stand. This is ridiculous, Victor shouted, standing up and breaking protocol. It's a coincidence. Common variable names. Sit down, Mr. Kinsley, Judge Holloway ordered. I will not sit down. Victor was losing it. The mask was slipping. I am being lectured by a girl who pours water for a living. She knows nothing. I built this company. I am the smartest man in this room. Mr. Kinsley, Sadie said, her voice cutting through his shouting. If you wrote the code, tell me, what is the final line of the poem embedded in the kernel? Victor froze. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked around wildly. You don't know, Sadie said softly, because you didn't write it. The ceremony of innocence is drowned, Sadie quoted. That's the line, and that is what you did to my father. You drowned him. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Victor slumped back into his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked exactly like what he was, a thief who had been caught. The jury took less than 3 hours to return a verdict. Guilty on 4 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of perjury, and assault. In a separate civil ruling, Kinsley Tech was found liable for intellectual property theft, awarding $400 million to the estate of Robert Bennett. Victor Kinsley was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. As he was led away in handcuffs, there were no flashing lights or screaming fans. He was yesterday's news, a cautionary tale about hubris who had finally been silenced. 6 months later, the spring air in New York was crisp. Sadie Bennett stood on the steps of the courthouse, not as a plaintiff, but as a newly sworn-in attorney. She had passed the bar in the top 1% of her class. Arthur and Leo were waiting for her. Arthur looked frail, but his eyes were sharp. "Counselor," he said, tipping his hat. "It suits you." "I couldn't have done it without you," Sadie said, hugging him. "I just opened the door," Arthur replied gently. "You walked through it." They drove to the skyscraper that used to be the headquarters of Kinsley Tech. The giant K had been removed, replaced by a sleek logo, Bennett Montgomery Systems. Inside, Victor's old office had been stripped of its pretension. The atmosphere was no longer one of fear, but of collaboration. "We're rebranding the Helios Protocol," Leo said, looking out the window. "We're calling it the Robert Protocol, and we need a CEO for this division. I'm taking over Montgomery Holdings, so I can't do it. We need someone who understands the code, the law, and the ethics." Sadie blinked. "You want me?" "I was a waitress 6 months ago." "And Victor Kinsley was a billionaire 6 months ago," Arthur countered. "Titles change, Sadie. Character does not. You have the character of a leader. You treat people with respect. That is what this company needs." Sadie looked out at the city. She remembered the nights studying on the subway, her father's tired eyes, and the moment Victor called her stupid. That word had been the fuel that forged her into steel. "I'll do it," Sadie said. "On one condition. We keep the waiter rule. Every executive we hire must work a shift at the Gilded Oak. They need to know that the person pouring the water is just as important as the person drinking it." Arthur smiled, his eyes crinkling. "Done." That evening, Sadie returned to the Gilded Oak. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a tailored suit. Henri beamed as she entered. "CEO Bennett? Is table 1 open?" "Just Sadie, Henri. And yes." She sat in the booth where it all began. When Mark the bartender brought the 82 Petrus, he tried to offer it on the house. "No," Sadie said firmly. "Put it on my tab, and bring glasses for everyone. The kitchen staff, the bus boys, Thomas. Everyone." As the staff gathered around, holding crystal glasses of wine that cost more than their rent, Sadie raised a toast. "To the invisible people," she said, her voice steady and strong. "May we never be overlooked again." "To Sadie!" they cheered. Sadie took a sip, the wine tasting of earth and victory. She looked at the empty seat across from her where Victor Kinsley used to sit. she had served him justice. And it was a dish best served cold, with a side of absolute success. Victor Kinsley thought his wealth made him untouchable, and that a waitress was beneath his notice. He learned the hard way that character is the only true currency in this world. By underestimating Sadie Bennett, he didn't just lose a deal. He lost his freedom and his legacy. Sadie proved that dignity and intelligence aren't defined by a job title, and that the little people you step on today might be the ones holding the gavel tomorrow. It is a reminder to treat everyone with respect, because you never know who is pouring your water. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to see an arrogant billionaire get what he deserves, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story.